Hi, I'm Joey, and I'm an artist and also a student. And I'm 21 years old, and I feel like I am now too old to be a prodigy. I feel like I've missed my chance to be a prodigy. And that's what this video is about. I just want to talk to you guys about that. This is kind of my version of the gifted kid burnout. This is my contribution to that discussion. Um, uh, Here the meme I will put that I like and think is funny. So I want to start by just talking about myself. Who the heck am I? Talking about being a prodigy. What does that mean? What do I mean? And just kind of introduce myself a little bit and why I'm talking about this topic. And I hope that you will relate to this and feel a catharsis is the point of this video. I was, as a kid, pretty smart. That sounds like I'm bragging, and I am. But yeah, as a kid, I read a lot. I loved to read and learn about science, and I watched Vsauce, right, and Veritasium when I was a little kid, and I was always very curious about particularly science, math. Later, I got older. Not so much math when I was really young. It's hard to understand math when you're really young, but I can remember when I was maybe like 8 reading this book about the Manhattan Project and just loving it and not really getting most of it. Like, I was too young to really understand most of the science, but I just was fascinated by the story, and it was just something I was always passionate about, physics and chemistry or biology or whatever. I just read about stuff like that, and I think we're going to get into why I've always wanted to be a prodigy later. I think one of the reasons I've always wanted to be a prodigy is just because when you are a little kid and you read science books and stuff, adults tell you that you're really smart and they say, "Wow, you're a genius. I'm not even as smart as you and you're like 6." And that's not a good thing to say to a kid because it gives them an inflated ego, which I now have because I'm sitting here talking about being a prodigy. Like, I don't know. So I think we're going to get more into that later, but I think when you have these experiences as a kid, they inform your personality as an adult. As a kid, I was not a good student. I wasn't a good student until I was maybe 19 years old. That's when I kind of became a good student. Before that, I was a bad student. When I was 13, I started making music. And I think I've always been more of an idea guy than a. I've always been a big picture guy, I guess. I've never really been a very much a left brained kind of guy. Obviously, I've been into science and math, but I'm always more. I think I maybe liked those things more aesthetically than literally. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of a little bit about who I am. Um, I have here written down no real successes to speak of, which is a little bit pessimistic, but it is true. I have never been like very successful at anything. I've never really like done anything particularly interesting with my whatever that I have. I've always felt like I was racing the clock, right? Even when I was like a little kid, even when I was like 12 or 13, I always felt like I was running out of time. Like, I have to be this prodigy that gets all this crazy stuff done by like some young age, and I always felt like I was running out of time. Um, and I always felt like I wasn't living up to my potential or like being who I should have been. And I felt this way even when I was like 11 or 12, right? Which is kind of crazy. Um, and then, yeah, so everyone else has always been very proud of me. My friends and family have always been like, wow, we're proud of you and everything you do. But I've never felt that way. I've always felt like a failure. I've always felt like I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing, or that I was running out of time to become this prodigy that I was supposed to be, according to, I guess, what people had said about me. And by the way, I just want to reiterate, the point of this video isn't just for me to sit here and say, well, I was a kid, I was smart, and I read books, and I watched Vsauce. The point is, if you are similar to me, you can feel a catharsis and hopefully relate to some of what I'm saying. That's what I'm trying to get done with this video. I'm not just trying to sit here and brag about that I was good at shapes and colors class as a kid, which I was, I guess. Okay, so we've talked about me a little bit, some of my feelings and thoughts around prodigy and genius and productivity and some of my just idiosyncrasies. Now I wanted to talk about and get into what is a prodigy, and why have I always wanted to be one? I think fundamentally what a prodigy is a young genius, right? Someone who is a genius, who is prolific in some way, that is also very young. Um, and I think one of the big reasons that I've always wanted to be a prodigy is because I think people have always told me that I was a prodigy, or when I was a little kid, people told me I was very smart for a little kid, and I never felt that way. I never felt like I had done anything to deserve that praise, and so I think part of me has always wanted to catch up to that praise that people have always given me, like to really do something to justify that or to live up to that expectation of, well, I mean, I guess I'm some kind of fucking, I don't mean to swear in these videos, but some kind of crazy genius, like I should do something with that, right? And I think that's where that desire to be a prodigy comes from. And I also think that I've always felt some kind of need to justify myself or justify my idiosyncrasies. You know, like if I could be a genius or if I could produce some great work, that would justify my weirdness and existence, I guess. And so that's another thing I wanted to mention and bring up about wanting to be a genius, because you want to sort of justify yourself. And I've always been jealous of people, however old I was. I've always been jealous of people that were my age, that were more successful and talented and smart than me. So two that I wanted to bring up. Quideka. I've always been jealous of Quideka. I've been a fan of Quideka since I was like 14, and he would have been like 17 at the time. And I would say Quideka is a prodigy. He's like 23 or 24, and he's this critically acclaimed indie musician. He's like already kind of one of the greatest producers like ever. And I'm jealous of him. I'm jealous of his prodigy. I kind of wish people said that about me a little bit. I'm also jealous of Cameron Winter, who I just recently discovered, frontman for the band Geese. I found his album Heavy Metal, and I love that so much now. Like I've heard it like 30 times in the past 30 days. And he's another guy. He's like my age, you know. He's like basically the same age as me, and he's like super successful and talented, and he's like this genius singer songwriter, and I'm not really that. So I think part of the reason I feel like I want to be a prodigy is because I'm jealous of these people. That's two random examples, but yeah, I've always been jealous of the attention that and the validation that people like that get, and I've always wanted that for myself. Like I've wanted someone to write an article about me, which is a very prideful feeling that I'm not necessarily proud of. I'm kind of ashamed of that feeling, but I've always wanted someone to write an article about me, like, wow, this guy's a genius. This guy's the next big thing. Okay, so I wanted to talk about that and confess my prideful feelings. And now, my next bullet point is what has stopped me. Why am I not a prodigy? Why am I not like these people I've mentioned? Why have I not succeeded in the way that they have? I think the biggest reason is that I've always been lazy. I've always struggled with work ethic and conscientiousness. I've always been, you know, kind of like a layabout. That's just kind of how I've always been. I've always been kind of a space cadet. I've also always hated myself for that. It's the thing that I hate the most about myself is my lack of what you could say hustle. My lack of hustle or, work ethic, conscientiousness. I've always had a really negative relationship with myself about that. So that's the first thing that stopped me. I think I'm just not a very productive person. The second big thing is perfectionism. There's a great quote by David Foster Wallace. I know I keep bringing him up, and that bringing that guy up is like putting a kick me sign on your back, I guess. But hey, I liked Infinite Jest. I read it and understood it. Sorry. Sorry, I got it. But yeah, he has a quote where he says, if your fidelity to perfectionism is too high, you never get anything done. You never do anything because you have to sacrifice the perfect thing in your head for the imperfect thing in reality. And I agree with that, and that's how I've always felt, is that I'm a perfectionist, and not in the sense of that I sit here and work on something till it's perfect, but in the sense of I don't even really start working on it because I know it's not going to be perfect, and I hate it for that. And I just want to be perfect, and I'm not. And so then that bothers me, and I never get stuff done. So that's how I feel about perfectionism. I've always been crushed by self-pressure. I've always put a lot of pressure on myself. This is kind of tying in with the perfectionism thing. I think I've always had very high standards for myself, and when I don't reach those standards, I feel really badly, and then that is not a productive feeling. Um, and I think then this actually ties in with the next point. I've always struggled with rest. I think I struggle to be productive, and so then I feel negatively about myself, and I have these higher standards for myself that I'm not reaching, and then I feel like I don't deserve to rest. So when I try to rest, it's not like a productive, restful rest. It's like an unrestful, restless rest where I'm thinking, man, I should be working right now, which is not a restful feeling or thought. And I think there's this kind of vicious cycle of not being productive enough and then feeling like I can't rest, which means I'm not rested, which means I can't be productive, which means I can't rest. And yeah, that's how I feel about that. And finally, under this, actually not finally, there's more. But the damn phone, that damn phone. The big problem with looking at your phone is that it's not productive and it's not restful. Like scrolling YouTube shorts. For me, I was never on TikTok, but I was at YouTube Shorts. I got off it now, though. I'm done. But yeah, scrolling YouTube Shorts isn't productive. Clearly, like no one would think it is, but it's also not restful, which you may think it is. It's not. It's actually incredibly taxing to constantly be looking at podcast clips and news and all kinds of stuff, just every 15 seconds. That's actually incredibly stressful on your brain. And so that's why it's really bad, is because it's neither. It's not productive or restful. So that's why I don't think anyone should do that anymore. Now, we're still on the bullet point of what has stopped me from being a prodigy. And so now we are on to mental illness. I am mentally ill. I've always been mentally ill. I've always struggled with anxiety. And I've always been very neurotic. Neuroticism is your fidelity to negative emotion, you could say. And the thing about being very sensitive to negative emotions is that it makes you very bad at sitting down and practicing something for an hour plus, which is necessary for being a good musician. I've always really struggled. I've technically played guitar since I was 13, but I've probably practiced it for fewer than 50 hours, cumulatively over that, however many 8 years that is. Because I'm just really bad at practicing. I'm not good at sitting down and practicing, and I think part of the reason is that I'm just very, very sensitive to feelings of frustration or boredom or dissatisfaction or whatever negative feelings would stop you from practicing. I'm very sensitive to those, and so I've always been bad at sitting down and practicing. My final bullet point under what has stopped me from being a prodigy is that I've always had many interests. Which I kind of touched on before. I've always loved science and math. When I was older, I loved math. I've also always, been a musician since I was a little kid, and I want to do videos, and I want to do this other thing, and another thing, and a different thing. And so I've always kind of had that jack of all trades quality. But what I have written down here is master of none sucks. Which I do feel that way. I think it's much better to be a master of one thing than, I'm more Jackie Chan 10,000 kicks versus one kick 10,000 times. I'm more Jackie Chan mentality. I don't believe you should be a jack of all trades, but I am one. It's kind of not something I can necessarily control, but I think I've always resented myself for having too many different interests and passions because I've never been able to really drill down and just focus on one thing and get really good at it, which is kind of a requirement for being a genius at anything. Okay, so that's some of what my thoughts and feelings are about that. My final bullet point, moving forward. This is a lot of times my final bullet point. So we've had a kind of a discussion here and a conversation. Now, what's the next steps, right? And I think my first bullet point here is letting go of pride. Ultimately, the desire to be a prodigious young genius celebrity is very prideful. And it's not necessarily a productive feeling, and it's important to kind of let go of it, I think. Let go of your pride. Forgiving yourself for not being the coolest guy that has ever lived. Forgiving you, say, hey, you know what? That's all right. Right. Maybe I don't need to be the most amazing guy that's ever been alive on the planet. And I wanted to bring up this finger trap analogy, which I use for a lot of things because it's a very profound analogy. Um, Feeling negatively about yourself is not productive. So, in the same way that a finger trap, you can't pull out of it like that because the forces get redirected into holding your fingers in. You have to push into it, and then you can take them out. And the analogy is you have to let go of your need to be a genius and to be amazing to actually become the best thing you can be, because that when you let go of the pride, you don't have that perfectionism problem. A lot of your kind of problems go away because now you're just focused on the work, and then you can actually be great once you've let go of your need to be great. So that's the finger trap of perfectionism or whatever. um Sharing the workload. I have decided as a musician that I'm going to start a band soon because I am tired of trying to do everything myself, and I want to share my workload with other people. I think that will be a productive thing for me to do. And if you are someone who's been trying to do something all by yourself, I would recommend that you consider making some new friends that can do it with you, and then you can all be genius collectively together instead of you having to carry the entire thing on your own back, which is very difficult, and most people can't do it. That's why most people aren't geniuses. And that's okay. You don't have to be a genius like we already covered previously. My very final bullet point for this video: it wouldn't have made you happy anyway. And I think anybody who has achieved this prodigy status would probably agree with me that people writing articles about you and saying you're amazing wouldn't even have made you happy if it did happen. It probably would have made you feel even worse. And just given you even worse imposter syndrome than you already had. So it's a stupid thing to aspire to anyway. And that's kind of all I have to say about this topic. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I will talk to you guys again at some point in the future. See ya.